James Corden? Dick. Michael Jackson? Met him. And who did I interview fresh out of jail? Hi you guys, it's me, Kathy Griffin, and welcome to Kathy Griffin Talk Your Head Off. Please like and subscribe. And by the way, I'm loving your comments. And one of the questions in the comments was, have I ever met Michael Jackson? And the answer is yes. I'll tell you all about it. Also, you know how James Corden, the former talk show host, has a reputation for being a dick? He is, and I'll tell you why. All right, in fact, let's get to that one first. There is a guy named Craig Ferguson who used to have the talk show that James Corden took over for. And you can look up all of James Corden's trials and tribulations where he was getting in trouble for bad behavior, you know, in restaurants, and there's clips of him hosting stuff where he's being a jerk. And I admit, I wish that that job had gone to me, or at least a female of some kind. Preferably a woman of color with some experience. I'm getting there. I did want that job, and when Craig Ferguson used to host, it's called The Late Late Show, and when Craig was hosting one time in the commercial breaks, he was always really, really good to me. And he said, you know, I'm gonna leave the show, and I think you should take over, or at least be in the running for taking over, something like that. I thought that was a hot tip. And I called my then agents and I said, Craig Ferguson is leaving The Late Late Show and I would like to get in early to be considered to be his replacement. It's been my dream to have a late night talk show, and there hasn't been a female in network late night since Joan Rivers in the 11:30 or 12:30 spot. So, or if you're in the Midwest, 10:30 or 11:30 spot. I'm a Chicagoan. I met with my agents and I said, I would like to meet with this guy named Leslie Moonves, who was the head of CBS at the time. And I'd like to put my hat in the ring and explain why I think they need me and I'd be good for the show and what I could bring to the table, etc. So my then agent said, Leslie said that they're not considering women at this time. This is all alleged. And by the way, has been covered by the press at the time years ago when it happened. And I said, well, you should tell Leslie that that's against labor laws in the state of California to just take an entire gender and say they're not being considered. So the agents did not agree with that. And then of course I ended up saying it in an interview. And then Leslie, who later on was Me Too'd out of the business, by the way, thank God. And so Leslie then made a statement about me at the time saying that that wasn't true and that I'll say anything to stay relevant. Like one of those typical, I've had many, many male executives and powerful men issue statements about me. Those are very easy to look up. But usually she's desperate, she's not going anywhere, so she's trying to stay relevant. And I thought it was shocking that the head of a network would say that. And so who did he give the job to? A white guy. I didn't know who James Corden was. I knew that he was a Broadway guy and people thought he was really great on Broadway. And I love the structure of the show because I'm a big Graham Norton fan. So I actually had a talk show on Bravo for 2 years called Kathy, which you can see online now. It's on Amazon and you can enjoy it. And what I like is the structure of having all three guests on the couch at the same time, because I find that you get different answers and a different vibe when the guests are all together than the typical one-on-one interview for 7 minutes where the guest is plugging a movie or a TV show or something. So I really would have loved that job. Then I was asked to be a guest on the show, and I don't even remember what I was promoting at the time. I honestly don't. But it was at Television City, which is in Los Angeles, at Beverly and Fairfax. It's a famous studio. So they had just rebuilt it for him to make it look different than the Craig Ferguson show. And they warned me about the steps because I was wearing like Louboutins that were like up to here. They had to be at least 5-inch heels. And they were gorgeous, but they were painful and they weren't practical to walk in, obviously. And I had a, you know, tight dress on, and it was, I think, the 2000s, so I probably had like a ton of like fake tanner on my arms and legs, you know, the whole nine. Sure enough, he does his opening monologue to near silence, but whatever. And the live audience was there, and I love having a live audience to perform for, even if it's just a talk show. And they introduced me, And I walked down the stairs, because that's how he wanted his guests to come out. Not come out from the back like a normal talk show, but to come down the stairs and then take a seat on the couch. So sure enough, I don't remember which stair, I slip and I fall. And the whole studio audience just goes like that, because I was bleeding. Now, I'm fine, but I took a spill. So here's this live audience thinking, okay, we're going to a TV taping. Next thing you know, they see fake tanned Kathy Griffin fall down a flight of stairs in very, very high heels and a tight dress. So me being me, I just jumped up when I could and I kind of went ta-da or something like that, because I wanted the audience to know I was okay. And then I walked over and I took my seat and I crossed my legs and I put the leg that was bleeding on top so everybody could see it. And I just kind of acted like it was no big deal and this happens every day, or I make some jokes like that. So James Corden freaks out. So he stops the taping and he goes, okay, you got to do the entrance again. And I go, and this is off camera, and I go, James, the whole audience saw me fall. They're gonna think it's weird if we come back, I patch myself up somehow. Like, no, by the way, nobody came, no paramedic or anybody came. And I said, first of all, I'm bleeding, so I'd have to go get kind of cleaned up. But also, this is gold for you. I said, this is a real moment that actually happened. Now you and I in the audience are kind of having a moment together. We have a shared trauma bond, but we can make it funny. I said, don't work against this, go with it, go with it. And it was, I wanna say it was one of the first weeks of the show. I tried to talk to him again as if they were filming, because I don't know if they ever stopped on filming. And he just blanked. Like, he didn't know what to say to me, he didn't have any jokes to make. And then he just kept saying, you've gotta go back, you gotta go back and come back again. You have to come back again, like that. He was so thrown. I almost said, how did you get this gig? How did you beat out so many people, especially women, for this gig? How? But I did it. I'm a team player. And so sure enough, I go back to my dressing room. I get a washcloth. I take the blood off my leg. I do remember I definitely had leg makeup on because I had to wait for the bleeding to stop. I didn't want to put a Band-Aid there. So I'm like holding a cloth on my own leg. And they're like, how long, Miss Griffin? And I'm all, just a minute. And so I stopped bleeding. I put so much makeup on my leg that you can't see, and it's starting to bruise, but at least the blood is not dripping down my leg anymore. I'm gonna be honest, the second time I was actually scared to walk down the stairs, and they said, oh yeah, they're really, really slippery, be careful. And I go, well, why don't you have another way for your guests to enter the stage? And they're like, oh, you're a riot. So the second time, I walked down the stairs, but I could tell the audience was still kind of nervous for me because they didn't hear any of the exchange with James. They just saw us talking, probably could tell by his facial expression he was very thrown. I was kind of smiling and trying to talk to him, and he wasn't going with it. So I went down, I did my segment, and then I was never asked back on the show again. And I think he hosted for like 10 years or something. Never again, no matter what project I was doing, they were always just too busy. And then somebody sent me an article from one of the rags, like I think the National Enquirer, which is very Trump friendly, by the way, if you don't know that. It was mentioned in the Mueller report. They had to give them immunity, in fact. David Pecker and Dylan Howard, I'm looking at you. Magically, an article shows up in the Enquirer saying that I was a difficult guest, and I believe the article even said, I was such a drama queen that I threw myself down the stairs to get attention. And I thought, who sold me out? Who called the Enquirer and thought, we're gonna plant a story saying that Kathy Griffin threw herself down the stairs to make her leg bleed just to get more attention. But it worked because I was never invited on the show again. And I don't even know if I ran into that guy. If I saw him now, I doubt I would say anything, or it wouldn't be pleasant. But to this day, I'm still shocked by what a dick he was. He was a dick. Okay, so I've done so many gigs over my career that are disparate, to put it nicely, and many happy D-list jobs. So there used to be a show on VH1 called Behind the Music. And let me tell you, it was epic because they would take music stars, and originally it was kind of fallen stars, like people that had fallen upon hard times or people that were really big and famous and were no longer, and they would tell their story. Now, as the show progressed and became a massive hit, which it was, then they started getting really big acts like Fleetwood Mac, where they actually sat down for the interviews. And then you wanted to be on Behind the Music because it would make your album a hit album again. I think the first one they did was this guy named Leif Garrett, who somehow is still alive because his Behind the Music was so shocking. He was a teen idol and he had long, like, feathered hair in the 70s. I don't remember his songs, but I remember him being on Teen Beat and all of the teen magazines of my day. And, well, he was younger than me. He then got into a car accident where he paralyzed somebody and admitted that he was addicted to black tar heroin. I had never even heard of such a thing. Like, I had heard of heroin, but he kept saying black tar heroin. And later on, I worked with him. I was on a sitcom called Suddenly Susan with Brooke Shields, and he was in the makeup chair. And I said to him, you know, before you're Behind the Music, I've never heard of black tar heroin. I've only heard of heroin. But boy, that sounds like it was really difficult to get clean from or whatever. So he then explained to me, and by the way, I put this in one of my comedy specials back in the day. He explained how when he would do black tar heroin, he would scratch himself a lot. And that he would scratch his face and he imitated it. And he goes, sometimes I would scratch myself down to the bone. And I never forgot that. I was the perfect person to host the Behind the Music reunion. So they decided to take some of the most watched episodes of Behind the Music. Now, this doesn't mean the celebrities that were selling records off the shelf or having clean and sober, happy lives. This was the episodes that got the most eyeballs. So I go to host, and I can't remember the whole lineup. I hope you could find this online somewhere. I have no idea. But as the host, I kept getting called into the private dressing room of the guests, and they each had an ask. So sure enough, one of the stars was Bret Michaels from Motley Crue. So part of his Behind the Music was all the ups and downs with Motley Crue, but that he also had a Pamela Anderson sex tape. So a lot of people forget there wasn't just Pamela and Tommy Lee, which is horrible that that ever got released and is against the law now, and it's called revenge porn. But there was another one with Bret Michaels when that was her boyfriend. And the scuttlebutt around town, or the rumor, was that Bret had released that one himself to maybe help his own career. And obviously it would be seen, you know, if you're the guy, it's cool. If you're the girl, you're a whore. But if you're a guy, it's cool, right? And so he calls me into his room. And by the way, where were the producers? Like, nobody was with me making sure that, like, the trains were running on time. So he's like, Kath, and I didn't know him. And he's like, hey, just one thing. Could you not mention the sex tape I had with Pamela? And I was like, oh, and I'm looking at my card where the producers wrote down all the questions. And I'm like, well, it's not really up to me, Bret. I mean, you know, that sex tape was pretty famous and it was kind of a big part of the episode. And he's like, yeah, I know. Could you just not mention it though? Like, no matter what I said, he would be like, got it. Could you not mention it? So I walked out of there thinking, oh God, I know I have to ask the question. I know they're gonna be in my earpiece during the show saying, ask about the sex tape. So I'm processing that. And MC Hammer calls me into his room. I go into his room and I'm like, hi, MC Hammer, nice to meet you. And he's all, Kath, could you do me a favor? Could you not ask about me going bankrupt? Because, I don't really want to talk about it. And it'd be great if you could just not ask. And I'm looking at the cards again. And one of the questions is like, how did you go from having all those millions of dollars to being bankrupt? I mean, he had this very famous house in Oakland. He had too many people on the payroll. It was a big part of his behind the music. So same thing. I'm like, oh, MC Hammer. Well, as a matter of fact, I don't write the questions and I'm just the host for hire, but they do want me to ask about bankruptcy. And it's really relatable to a lot of people. And I'm getting nervous thinking about it. And he's like, yeah, but could you not ask me about it? If it's up to me, I absolutely, but if it's not up to me, it's not up to me. Another guest was Rick Springfield, who has a big hit called Jesse's Girl, you've probably heard it, who had been arrested the night before for domestic violence. Then the producers, in addition to telling me absolutely ask Bret Michaels about the sex tape and MC Hammer about going bankrupt, said, we just got word Rick is coming. And I'm like, Rick who? Because the Rick Springfield I'm thinking of is in jail for suspected domestic violence, and his wife isn't looking too good right now. So what are you talking about? Nope, he wants to come here and explain himself. I go to the Behind the Music reunion hosted by Kathy Griffin. There's not a better platform, but remember, we didn't have social media in those days. So sure enough, Rick Springfield walks in, who I knew. He had been on, I believe, multiple episodes of the sitcom that I was on in the 90s called Suddenly Susan. So then Rick calls me aside. And I'm like, dude, are you sure you want to be here today? Like, he came from jail. I don't even think he went home. And he looked a mess. Not that I wanted to be protective of him because he probably got arrested for a good reason. And he said, no, I can explain everything. And sure enough, Rick Springfield takes the couch. And I think about half the audience was aware of his arrest. So there was a definite chill in the room. And then he went on to give what I consider to be a very thin and bad explanation of his spousal abuse arrest or suspicion of spousal abuse the night before in Malibu at his home. And I'm just going on like, okay, Kathy, just try to engage in conversation about this particular topic and then go on to the questions about the Behind the Music episode that he starred in. And to this day, I kind of can't believe that anyone advised him, you know what you should do? As soon as you're released from jail, you should go sit on a couch with Kathy Griffin and just talk it out. Just what's the worst that can happen? By the way, I don't even know if anything did happen. I have no idea if they're still married or what's going on. But let me tell you, to this day, hosting the Behind the Music reunion show is still one of the greatest gigs I ever had. And I did have to ask all the tough questions, but it was worth it. That was a day. That was the day. I haven't thought about that day in years. That's why I want you guys to like and subscribe, because I love it when you go in the comments and say, like, what's the weirdest hosting job you've ever had or anything like that. And then it sparks a memory in me of that very, very interesting day. A viewer asked me if I had ever met Michael Jackson, because I've been around a while. But let me tell you about the first time I saw him in person, because you're not even gonna believe this. I am aware that in some ways I'm kind of a modern day Forrest Gump. And I think it's just that I've been around so long, and being the cockroach that I am, I refuse to be exterminated, and God knows they've tried. And so I've had lots of run-ins over the years, and I've been doing this. I did my first commercial when I was 18, so I've been at this a long time, right? I was a background actor, and that means that this was back in the day when you had to use real live landline telephones. Yes, I'm holding my landline. And you would call several agencies every day at like 5 o'clock and see if anybody had any extra work for the next day. And I thought it was a good way for me to learn everything from set etiquette to who has what job to how things are filmed and what that really looks like. And I was an extra for years. I definitely paid my dues. And sometimes if you wore your own clothing, you would get a $15 wardrobe bump. So if I could wear my own clothes, I made $40. I get a call to go to this place that's in downtown LA. I don't even know if it still exists, but it's the Olympic Auditorium. And it was raggedy then. They used to have fights there, like prize fights, stuff like that. And they were shooting a commercial for Pepsi. And it was the Jacksons, the Jacksons. So it wasn't just Michael. It wasn't the Jackson 5 without Michael. It was the Jacksons. So it was that era. I want to say like around the Victory Tour, maybe. So I was just a member of the crowd. And obviously it's the Jacksons, so they have to have a big crowd shot of maybe, I don't know, I'm going to say there were 1,000 of us maybe. And we just stood there all day, and they would repeat the soundtrack, and Michael would come out, and the Jacksons were on stage first, if I recall, and then Michael would walk out, and then people would go even more crazy, and they would sing the song. So, remember, this is pre-internet. So I'm watching them film, and it's just fascinating to watch the Jacksons. Now, I'm not saying I was close to any of them. I was in the crowd, but there's big giant cameras on jibs, which are these like arms that move like this, and very high tech, and like I said, no CGI, nothing like that. And they had pyro. We had been watching them shoot this scene all day. And then I want to say at about 3 in the afternoon or something, they tell us all to go home. And that's very unusual in the extra world. Usually you're kind of the last to go and you're the last to know. And we didn't know what had happened. Like I said, there was no internet then. And I was all the way downtown, which is a long way from where I lived in Santa Monica, in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and dad at the time. And I went home and I said, I don't know what happened, but they let all of us extras go. But it was really exciting, and the Jacksons were there, and Michael Jackson was singing, and it was a really big production, and I was just filling my mom and dad in on it, and they were having, you know, boxed wine, I think. This is the way news traveled in those days. It was then on the local news that Michael Jackson had suffered some kind of injury on the set of a Pepsi commercial. So I'm watching the local news and I'm like, oh, that's what happened. But even then, they hid it. They acted like it was just a little bit of a pyro mistake. And it wasn't until years, if not decades later, that you could look up images of how severe that fire was in the back of his head. It burned like half his scalp off, you guys. It was horrible. Years went by, and then probably one of the cameramen, or as they're called, shooters, probably one of the shooters, I don't know who else in the world would have this footage, but somebody leaked the footage to show how seriously Michael Jackson was injured while filming this commercial. At a point in the song, flames would just burst up from the stage, and I'm sure the pyrotechnic team had done many commercials and movies and TV shows. I'm not blaming anybody. Somehow the pyro guys or somebody made the fire too massive, and his actual hair caught fire. I don't know, it's always been my theory, I don't know, but that's probably when he started getting addicted to drugs, because they say a burn injury is like the most painful thing you can have, and he was severely burned. I could not tell in real time that's what had happened to him, and he was whisked off the stage and we were sent home, and that was that. Years later, I had a small part in a Showtime, made for Showtime, comedy parody movie called Medusa Dare to Be Truthful. And it was a spoof of Madonna Truth or Dare, which is a great documentary. So the spoof was written and was starring Julie Brown, who was a really big personality on MTV, because MTV used to have videos and comedy and all kinds of stuff, but primarily videos. So Julie Brown, redhead, I loved her. She was a really big deal. She worked really hard on this project. It was very well done. And one of the things she did was she hired one of the choreographers that actually worked with Michael Jackson, because she wanted us to do Madonna-like dance songs, and they were parodies of Madonna songs. Like there was, you know, the song Vogue, obviously. So in the parody, the song was vague, vague, vague. And it was all about how celebrities are vague. Anyway, I'm such a bad dancer that I had to have like a separate dance class just for me because all the other dancers were actual dancers. Sure enough, we were at a dance rehearsal studio, not where we were filming, but we were just rehearsing the dancing. And I'm a comic. So Julie Brown was already good at it, and all the dancers would learn it in 2 seconds, and I'd be the only one like, can we practice one more time? So finally they had to get me my own personal dance captain. And it was this woman who was in the Smooth Criminal video, and her name is Smith. Her first name is Smith. I always remember that. And she was great, and she was very patient with me. Sure enough, I go into the rehearsal one day, and I walk past a packed studio. So I go to our studio, and I'm like, what's going on down the hall? I can tell something big is going on. And the choreographer goes, oh yeah, they're filming the new Michael Jackson video, a new music video he's doing for a song called Black or White. So I said, oh my God, can we watch the rehearsals? And they were like, I don't know, we gotta see if it's cool with their choreographer, who was named Vince Patterson, who did the choreography for that video. I believe he also did Thriller, amazing choreographer. I remember walking past the Michael Jackson studio again because I wanted to, see him and see their dancing, and I knew it would be just excellence. And I see the director, John Landis, just sitting on a folding chair reading the LA Times. Michael has not shown up. The Medusa Dare to Be Truthful shoot was already, in my D-list life, big budget, but you should have seen the crowd of people they had working on this Black or White video, and it became a huge video. But Michael didn't show up. So I don't know John Landis, I don't know big directors, but I went up to him and I said, just out of curiosity, what happens when the star just doesn't show up? I've never even heard of that. And he goes, well, it just costs money. And I said, so how much does it cost a Michael Jackson video if Michael Jackson doesn't show up? And he goes, $1 million a day. And I just thought that was mind-blowing. So it turns out that Vince Patterson ended up coming to our rehearsal, and because he was friends with Smith, he said, do you want to watch our rehearsal without Michael? And we all said yes. So I got to see the original choreographer with Vince playing the role of Michael. And let me tell you, as much as the finished video is amazing, he said Michael will improvise quite a bit of the dancing, but the choreography was something that I've never seen anything like it in my life before. It was just dazzling. So then I get home, and once again, there's no internet, and I read in the Los Angeles Times that Michael Jackson went to the Westfield Mall on Pico Boulevard, and if you know, in LA, and he went there with Emmanuel Lewis instead of going to his video shoot. And I'm just saying that's what happened because that's what I read. I wasn't there, but that's fucking weird. Then the next day he shows up to work, and because he's friends with this girl Smith, she says, do you guys wanna say hi to Michael? So like say hi means just like lay back while she says hi. So I said, of course. So we go into their catering room, and I don't know if he was like a vegan or what, but I remember the spread was all super healthy. I believe it was vegan. Tofu filet, I know, I still think of that tofu filet, it was so good. He starts talking to this girl he knows really well, Smith, and you guys, his voice was totally normal. He didn't do the like, hi, Michael. Like he didn't do that high-pitched whispery voice. He was like, hey Smith, good to see you, how you doing? Yeah, I've been pretty busy. Like he was so normal, and this is gonna sound weird, the face work was not as shocking up close. And I just say that because he was ahead of his time in that way. He was not afraid to get some work done. I remember those two takeaways: normal voice, not as shocking looking in person, and she talked to him, and I think maybe we each got to say hi, if even, but there you go. That's my Michael Jackson experience. All right, I think this has been an action-packed episode between us. I don't know about you, but please subscribe to my Patreon because that'll be a whole new half hour. And thank you for watching Kathy Griffin Talk Your Head Off. And please like and subscribe.